London Mayfair, a ballroom carved from gaslight and mirrors. A forgotten sister stands at the edge of glory while whispers sharpen like knives. Then, silence. A marquess crosses the floor and kneels. Is it mercy, defiance, or the first fracture in a fortress of secrets? Behind his bowed head waits a locked room, a ledger inked in lies, and an impossible choice between duty and desire. When the world watches, a single gesture can save a name or shatter an empire. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what draws you to period romances, the slow burn glances, the forbidden vows, or the triumph of a woman finally seen. London, Mayfair. The year of our Lord, 1862. It was a night carved from crystal and gaslight, the kind of evening whispered about in drawing rooms and preserved in the memories of debutantes as the moment when fortunes turned or crumbled. The Hargraves had arrived late, fashionably so, though not by Ariel's choosing. It had been Isabella's insistence. One must be noticed, darling, not merely seen. The ballroom of the Cavendish estate gleamed with mirrored walls and towering chandeliers, their golden halos dancing over silk gowns and polished boots. The scent of beeswax polish mingled with violet water and the distant perfume of hothouse roses. Conversation fluttered like fans, pointed, polite, and often cruel. Ariel stood beside a pillar draped in ivory muslin, her gloved fingers loosely clasped around a silver fan she had no intention of opening. Her gown was a soft shade of clouded blue, stitched by her own hands, with a square neckline edged in modest lace and sleeves that just grazed her elbows. No diamonds glittered at her throat, only a small cameo brooch, a gift from her late grandmother. Her hair, pulled back in coils and pinned with quiet precision, reflected not the vanity of fashion, but the humility of habit. By her side, Isabella shimmered like a prized ornament. Golden curls framed her powdered face, her lips painted in a shade slightly too bold for the room. Her gown was satin, in hues of champagne and rose, the bodice stitched so tightly it seemed to shape the very air around her. Pearls dripped from her ears, her fan fluttered like a butterfly, and her laughter, a high, deliberate sound, rippled toward the cluster of young men gathered near the orchestra. It was to no one's surprise when Lord Everley, heir to a minor viscountcy, approached them. His gaze barely brushed Ariel before settling hungrily on Isabella. "Miss Hargrave," he said, bowing not to Ariel but to her sister. "Would you honor me with the first quadrille?" Isabella dipped her head with practiced charm. "Why, my lord, I thought you'd never ask." The words were harmless, but the glance she cast Ariel, half pity, half triumph, burned like acid beneath her smile. Ariel inclined her head, murmuring something about needing air, though no one heard. She stepped away, trailing the edge of the ballroom, barely brushing the opulence that surrounded her. She did not weep. Not in public, not ever. But the heat rising in her chest, fury or shame she could not tell, threatened to unlace her breath. It was then that she heard it, a low chuckle from a cluster of young lords. One, ruddy from brandy and arrogance, said just loudly enough, "Poor thing, always the shadow, never the sun. Perhaps she might dance with the footman if she smiles prettily enough." Laughter scattered like shards of crystal. Ariel stopped, her spine stiffening, her hands, still gloved, clenched so tightly that the fan bit into her palm. She refused to turn, refused to grant them even the satisfaction of her retreat. But someone else moved. Across the polished floor, parting the crowd with the gravity of his name, Lucian Blackwood, Marquess of Ashbourne, approached like a shadow carved from onyx. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair tinged with silver at the temples, and his presence was a thing both whispered about and feared. A widower, reclusive, cold, powerful. And yet now, without a word, he stopped before Ariel. The music paused, conversations wilted, fans froze mid-flutter. Then before the eyes of London society, he bowed his head and knelt. "My lady," he said, voice low and rich as dusk. "May I have this dance?" Ariel could not breathe. The room was utterly still. She could feel her sister's gaze, sharp as pins. Her mother's shocked intake of breath from somewhere across the floor, and yet all she saw was him. The Marquess did not waver. His hand remained extended, not in pity, but in deliberate public defiance. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. He rose, not as one rescuing a maiden, but as if she were the one offering salvation. They moved to the floor. The music resumed, hesitant at first, then swelling. As they began to waltz, Ariel felt the room melting into blur. His touch was firm yet respectful, his gloved hand resting at the small of her back, guiding her effortlessly. He did not speak beyond what civility required, and yet every gesture, every glance held weight. When she stumbled slightly on the turn, he steadied her, his eyes meeting hers for a breathless instant. No mockery, no amusement, only recognition. When their fingers brushed more tightly in the sweep of the second refrain, she felt it. The heat of something unspoken, restrained yet alive. Above them, on the mezzanine, Lord Henry Blackwood, Lucian's uncle, observed from behind a cut crystal tumbler. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was sharp when he murmured to the Earl of Lyndhurst, "Sentiment, dear friend, is dangerous when titles are at stake." Below, the dance ended. Lucian bowed. Ariel curtsied. But the silence left behind would echo in drawing rooms and parlours for days to come, because that night, in full view of the most watchful eyes in London, a Marquess had knelt before the forgotten sister and chosen her, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The heavy oak doors of the Hargrave townhouse closed behind them with the solemnity of a cathedral, and the echo lingered like a warning in the entrance hall. Gaslight flickered against the tall mirrors and gold-leaf mouldings, casting twin shadows behind Lady Margaret Hargrave and her eldest daughter. Ariel said nothing as the footman took her gloves. Her cheeks still burned, not from embarrassment, but from something more volatile. Her breath trembled in her chest, half disbelief, half something else she could not yet name. She had been danced with. No, claimed before half of London by a man who had no reason to look twice at her, much less kneel. But she did not allow herself to savor the memory. Not yet. Lady Margaret's heeled boots clicked sharply against the marble as she marched toward the drawing room. Ariel followed, instinct stronger than choice. Once inside, the matriarch turned, closing the door behind them with a deliberation that sent a shiver up Ariel's spine. "Well," Lady Margaret began, tugging off her gloves one finger at a time, "that was unexpected." Ariel looked toward the fire. "I imagine it was." Her mother's voice lowered, firm, measured, not unkind, but painfully strategic. "Do you realize what has just happened, child?" Ariel looked at her hands. "I believe so. You are now the object of attention, real attention." The Marquess of Ashbourne did not simply offer a dance, Ariel. He made a declaration, whether he intended to or not. Ariel turned to face her, her voice quiet but resolute. "And I am not for sale, Mama, not even to a Marquess." Lady Margaret sighed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, this isn't about gold or land. This is about opportunity. You've been invisible for years, and tonight, someone of influence held you in the light." Her voice softened slightly, just enough to make the blow sharper. "Let us not waste it." But Ariel did not answer, not immediately. She only pressed her hands to the mantelpiece and stared into the fire until her mother left the room. That night, sleep eluded her. The image returned again and again. The solemn blue-grey of his eyes, the weight of his hand as it took hers, the way his voice had said, "My lady." She stood at her window long after midnight, watching as a fog rolled across the square, softening the glow of the gas lamps into halos of gold. Somewhere in the mist below, wheels creaked and hooves clattered. A carriage moved slowly, deliberately, and when it paused before the Hargrave home, her heart stopped. The next morning, a card arrived on a silver tray. It was heavy, ivory, bordered in embossed black. The Marquess of Ashbourne requests the honour of calling on Miss Ariel Hargrave this afternoon. Lady Margaret's teacup rattled ever so slightly in its saucer. Isabella, seated near the window in a cascade of rose-coloured muslin, narrowed her eyes just enough to make the silence sharp. "Well," Lady Margaret said, "we shall need fresh flowers, and chairs arranged to catch the best light." Ariel folded her napkin with care. "Perhaps we shall also need to remember that this is not a spectacle." Her mother smiled tightly. "Everything in Mayfair is a spectacle, dear." Brie. When the hour arrived, Ariel stood in the parlour with hands clasped before her, dressed in a modest but well-cut dove-grey gown with pale embroidery at the cuffs. She wore no jewels, only the same cameo. Her heart fluttered, but her posture did not betray her. Lucian arrived precisely at the stroke of 3. He entered the room with the ease of someone accustomed to being studied and never shaken. He bowed deeply to Lady Margaret, and then to Ariel, his gaze lingering just long enough to stir something beneath her ribs. Lord Henry Blackwood, his uncle, followed at a polite distance, tall, sharp-eyed, dressed in austerity rather than fashion. He observed the room with the stillness of a falcon on a perch. Polite conversation followed. The weather, the performance at the opera, a recent flood near Westminster. And then, when tea had been offered and refused, Lucian turned to Ariel. "Miss Hargrave, may I speak with you in private?" Lady Margaret stiffened but said, "Of course. The morning room is quite pleasant at this hour." They stepped into the adjoining chamber, the door left open just enough to preserve propriety. Lucian stood by the fireplace, his hands behind his back, his bearing formal but not cold. "I owe you an explanation," he said. Ariel blinked. "You owe me nothing, my lord." "I believe I do. I made you a target last night. Whether I intended to or not, my action has drawn attention to you, and not all of it kind." She tilted her head, voice cool but curious. "And why did you do it?" He paused. Then simply, "Because you stood your ground." Ariel flushed. "I stood still." He shook his head once. "You did not run. That, Miss Hargrave, is rarer than you think." There was silence then, the kind that could either invite danger or confession. He continued, "I would like to propose a public courtship, not an engagement. Not yet, merely an arrangement. To protect your reputation, to silence the rumors." Ariel's lips parted in surprise. "You mean to turn gossip into strategy?" He allowed himself the barest trace of a smile. "Precisely." She considered him, this man cloaked in formality and shadow. His proposal was not romantic, not yet. But beneath the words lay something unspoken. Respect, recognition, curiosity. "I will consider it," she said at last, "but I will not be pitied." "You have my word," he replied quietly. As they returned to the parlour, Lord Henry's gaze flicked between them. When they left, the room seemed somehow smaller, the fire too bright. Later, Isabella found her in the corridor, blocking her way like a spectre in silk. "So this is how it happens," she said. "A single dance, a bowed head, and the world forgets your plane." Ariel met her eyes. Perhaps the world never looked closely enough to begin with. Isabella's expression twisted. "He doesn't want you, you know. He wants to spite the gossips. A wounded marquis has use for a ghost of a girl when no one else will do." Ariel did not respond. There was nothing to say. That evening, after the house settled, Ariel retreated to the small room of her bedchamber where she kept her sketchbooks. By the light of a single lamp, she flipped through pages of charcoal and ink, plans for a seamstress school, designs for modest uniforms, diagrams of looms and hand-cranked machines. A sound at the door startled her. She turned to find Lucian, standing just beyond the threshold. "I apologize," he said. "I left something. May I?" She nodded, unsure what he could have possibly left. He stepped inside, paused and glanced down at the open pages. "You drew these?" "I did." "For whom?" "For girls with no other place to go." He looked at her then, truly looked. And in that moment, the chill that surrounded him seemed to crack ever so slightly. "You surprise me, Miss Hargrave." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Do I?" "Yes." And then he left, without another word. The next morning the columns shrieked with ink, Ashbourne's Folly or London's New Rose, and above the fold, an illustration, a sketch of her profile, eyes downcast, titled "The Sister We Forgot." Far across town, in the study of Ashbourne House, Lord Henry snapped the paper closed and murmured into the silence, "Do not forget, Lucian, estates are balanced on fragile paper. A wife must strengthen, not weaken the ledger." But Lucian said nothing. He only looked out the frost-kissed window as if trying to remember the warmth of a woman's gaze over a table strewn with dreams. The fog in Spitalfields did not roll. It settled, like breath held too long in a narrow chest. The streets were slick with last night's drizzle, their cobblestones uneven and shining faintly beneath the murky light of a grey London morning. Carriages did not dare these alleys. This was not the London of lace fans and ballroom whispers. This was the city's other skin, stitched together with threadbare gloves and calloused palms. Ariel Hargrave, wrapped in a serviceable wool cloak, stepped down from the modest hired carriage that had brought her from Mayfair. She did not flinch at the smell of coal smoke or the faint, sharp tang of iron in the air. Her gloved hand reached for the brass handle of a weather-worn door, and she entered the Spitalfields sewing house for orphaned girls. The room she walked into was small, cold, and pulsing with life on the edge of exhaustion. The ceiling sagged, the panes were fogged with breath and steam, and the wooden floor creaked with every movement. Girls as young as 8 and no older than 16 sat bent over wooden tables with spools of coarse thread and dull needles. Their faces were pale, their lips chapped, their fingers raw. The mistress of the house, Mrs. Penbury, a sturdy woman with a deep voice and a permanent stain of ink on her apron, greeted Ariel with a tired curtsy. "You'll forgive the state of things, Miss Hargrave," she said, wiping her hands on her skirt. "We haven't had coal delivered in over a fortnight, and the baker cut our credit." Ariel nodded and removed her gloves slowly, her eyes scanning the room. "Do they eat today?" "Thin soup. It will do, for now." Ariel said nothing, but her gaze settled on a young girl in the corner, struggling to patch a sleeve. The child's hand trembled from cold or hunger, perhaps both. Without a word, Ariel crossed the room, knelt beside her, and gently took the cloth. "May I?" she asked softly. The girl nodded, wide-eyed. Ariel pulled a needle from her own reticule, thread already looped through the eye, and began to mend the sleeve with quiet, practiced strokes. The child watched her with reverence, then whispered, "You're too fine to be here, miss." Ariel smiled faintly. "I'm exactly where I'm needed." By the time she finished the patch, the girl had tears in her eyes. She mouthed a thank you, then tucked the mended sleeve to her chest, as though it were a thing of silk. Ariel stood, her back aching, but her resolve settling deeper. Mrs. Penbury approached again, looking hesitant. "There's talk," she said carefully, "that the Marquess of Ashbourne takes an interest in your welfare. If there's anything he might be persuaded to—" "I came as myself," Ariel interrupted gently, "not as anyone's fiancé. If help is needed, I'll see what I can do, but let no one wait for a man's shadow to fall across this threshold." Yet that afternoon, a sealed letter arrived, tucked discreetly beneath the parlour door of the Hargrave home. The parchment bore no crest, but the writing was unmistakable. Ariel unfolded it and read, "1 month's rent for the Spitalfields sewing house has been paid in full. No acknowledgement required, no credit taken, merely a shared concern." It was not signed, but the paper smelled faintly of bergamot, and her hands trembled only slightly as she folded it again. That evening, Ashbourne House stood in stark silence against the rising mist. Its stone facade loomed noble and watchful, but its windows offered no warmth, only reflections of street lamps and shadows. Inside, beneath ornate ceilings and golden sconces, Lucian Blackwood stood in his study, one hand on the fireplace mantel, the other holding a brandy he had not tasted. He had not told his uncle about the donation. He had not told anyone, because he knew exactly how Lord Henry would respond, and he was right. Moments later, the older man entered the study, his coat still buttoned, his boots still dusted from his walk through Belgravia. "You paid the sewing house's debt." Lucian did not turn. "They needed it. So do we." At that, Lucian did glance at him, the blue of his eyes colder than the glass in the window. "We," he said. "You draw no salary from my coffers, uncle. You command nothing." "I preserve everything," Lord Henry replied with clipped precision. "Ashbourne's holdings are not impervious to foolish generosity. Sentiment bleeds coffers faster than war." Lucian downed the brandy in one swallow. "Then perhaps it's time this house knew peace." Lord Henry did not respond, but the tension hung like dust in an old curtain, settled, suffocating. Later that week, Ariel stood once more before Ashbourne House, this time escorted formally by her mother and younger sister, who glittered even in daylight. The invitation had come with proper paper, sealed in wax, requesting her company, and by extension her family's, for tea. They were received by a butler whose face betrayed no opinion. The drawing room was vast and coldly elegant, all dark velvet and pale marble, with paintings of Ashbourne's past, peering down in austere judgment. Lucian greeted them with measured warmth, offering his hand to Ariel, but letting his gaze linger for the briefest second too long. She caught her breath when their fingers touched. A brush, nothing more, but her pulse betrayed her. Lady Margaret launched into polite conversation. Isabella feigned interest in the tapestries, but Ariel, drawn by a flickering curiosity, turned slightly toward a nearby corridor, one half hidden behind a velvet curtain. A door stood there, closed. Unlike the rest of the house, it seemed untouched, even untouched by light. Lucian followed her gaze. "That room has been locked for 3 years," he said softly, stepping beside her. She looked up at him, surprised by the sudden intimacy of his tone. "It belonged to your late wife," she murmured. He nodded, eyes on the door. "She played piano, often, and hated silence. Now I find I cannot bear either." The words hung there, vulnerable and real. Ariel turned back to the room, to the others, to the safety of performance and posture. But the weight of that door followed her, pressed itself into her thoughts like a signature she had not asked to read. When tea concluded and farewells were exchanged, Lucian walked them to the carriage. As Ariel stepped inside, he held the door for her, and just before she turned away, he spoke low so only she could hear. "Thank you for what you did at Spitalfields." She blinked. "How did you—" But he was already stepping back, offering only a faint, almost imperceptible smile. And as the carriage pulled away, Ariel looked through the frosted glass and saw the music room door still closed behind a house of marble and memory, and a man who had begun, perhaps too late, to open his own. The sky above Grosvenor Square held a violet hue, delicate and bruised, as dusk melted into night. Lanterns flickered one by one, their golden glows lining the iron fences like silent sentinels of secrets yet to unfold. The air was tinged with the sweetness of lilac perfume, and within the grand marble facade of Lady Evans's townhouse, the drawing room swelled with the sound of strings, laughter, and carefully sharpened civility. It was an evening designed for beauty, for art, for spectacle, and for cruelty. The musicale was already in progress when Ariel Hargrave entered, escorted by her mother. Her gown was a soft mauve satin, chosen for dignity, not dazzle. Her gloves were unadorned, her jewelry modest. Yet she moved with the composed elegance of someone aware she was being watched and that every glance carried a price. A month had passed since the night of the dance. The whispers had quieted, but they had not disappeared. They slithered behind curtains and bloomed in salons. Some said she was clever, others said she was lucky. A few, more venomous, claimed she was calculated. She had come tonight not to confront such rumors, but to endure them, to survive them with grace. Her eyes searched the room. Lucian was not yet there. By the far hearth, surrounded by admirers and fawning cousins, stood Isabella, resplendent in emerald tulle, with seed pearls stitched into the bodice like stars scattered across a night sky. Her hair, piled high, glinted gold beneath the chandeliers. Her laughter chimed at perfect intervals. She looked like spring incarnate, and she wielded it like a weapon. "Darling," Isabella called, sweeping toward Ariel with a painted smile. "Come stand near the fire. You always look so pale near lamplight. The hearth gives you color." Ariel blinked, taken aback by the uncharacteristic warmth. She moved to join her, and for a moment she believed, foolishly, that perhaps her sister had softened. Then Isabella leaned closer, just enough to speak into her ear, without seeming to speak at all. "It's generous of Lucian, isn't it?" she murmured sweetly. "To dance with the shadow no one else would touch." Ariel froze. Her fingers curled slightly, the lace of her gloves creaking beneath the strain. Isabella smiled wider and turned to her companions. "My sister has such a lovely eye for charity work. She sees the value in things the rest of us overlook." The circle tittered politely. Some dared to glance at Ariel. One or two had the decency to look away. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of the laughter, Mr. Silas Fairfax observed. He stood near the foot of the staircase, a flute of champagne in one hand, a velvet-bound notebook in the other. He was not handsome, his nose slightly crooked, his mouth thin, but his eyes were keen and predatory. He watched society not to join it, but to expose it. He wore scandal-like perfume, and tonight he had scented something ripe. He approached Lady Margaret first. "An enchanting evening," he said, bowing over her hand. "Your daughters are radiant." Lady Margaret smiled thinly. "You flatter, Mr. Fairfax." He tilted his head. "Only when it serves a purpose, my lady." With that he turned to Ariel. "Miss Hargrave, might I say how admirable it is that you maintain such quiet dignity? Most young ladies would have let the attention go to their heads." Ariel met his gaze. "Dignity does not rise or fall with attention, Mr. Fairfax." "Ah," he said, scribbling something in his notebook. "A lovely quote. May I use it?" "You already have." Later that evening, a folded note appeared beneath Ariel's reticule, resting on the velvet settee where she had sat moments before. The parchment was fine, familiar. It bore no name. Curious, she opened it. "He's lost before. He'll lose again. Ask him about the roses." A friend. The ink was thick, the loop of the letters feminine, but something about the tone struck her like a chill across the skin. As she turned the page over, a smudge of dark ink smeared across her glove. She examined it closely, not just any ink. She had seen that precise formula before, in her late father's study, and later, in the hands of Lucian Blackwood. The stationery was from Ashbourne House. A coldness bloomed in her chest. She did not cry. She did not even blink. But the note, this sudden sliver of poison, sank deep. She knew it was a lie, but lies had power when dressed in familiar paper and delivered in a room full of watchers. Across the hall, Lucian arrived, tall, commanding, his frock coat cut in obsidian velvet, his silver watch chain gleaming subtly against his waistcoat. As always, his presence shifted the air. His eyes found her, and in that moment, the world hushed. Ariel stood straighter, and when he approached, she did not offer the note. She merely smiled with effort. "I had hoped you would come," she said softly. "I would not let the evening pass without seeing you." He offered his arm. She took it, but her hand trembled slightly in his. In the hours that followed, the note spread by whisper, by glance, by suggestion. "A harmless joke," someone claimed. "A misunderstanding," said another. But the implication nestled in the room's corners like smoke. Ariel had chased him, had plotted, had maneuvered her way into his name and fortune. And in every corner, Mr. Fairfax lingered. The next morning, the columns howled. The quiet climber. Has London's new rose been cultivating power in the shade? Sources suggest a strategy behind the softness. Has the Marquess been ensnared? Lady Margaret's face was ashen. She flung the newspaper down. "We must act swiftly," she declared. "You must accept his proposal before this goes further." Ariel looked up from the ink-stained gloves she held in her lap. "I will not be married like a prisoner seeking pardon. Pride has its place, Ariel, but reputation does not wait." "No," she said, "but neither does self-respect." Later that evening, in the servants' corridor, the walls thin and the gaslights dim, Isabella stood with her maid, Ellen. The two were whispering hurriedly, glancing around before sliding a sealed envelope into the folds of a courier's satchel. "Just a little harmless story," Isabella said, smoothing her skirts. "It will pass by morning, and perhaps she'll learn to keep her head bowed, where it belongs." Ellen hesitated. "Do you think he'll read it?" "Oh, he'll read it, and he'll start to wonder." The door closed softly behind them, and far away, in the Ashbourne study, Lucian unfolded the very same note Ariel had touched, now tucked anonymously into his pocket by a concerned guest. He read it once, then again, and when his eyes caught the edge of the paper, where the watermark of his late wife's monogram still pressed faintly against the corner, his hand froze. Doubt, sharp and sudden, whispered where trust had begun to take root, but when he closed the note, he tucked it away without comment. Because sometimes, even a man who has weathered grief, war, and scandal still forgets that the sharpest betrayals do not come from enemies, but from the hands that once offered to help him fasten his cravat. The first snow of the season had fallen overnight. It lay upon the lawns of Holland Park like a silk sheet pulled gently over a sleeping city. The trimmed hedges shimmered with frost. The garden statues wore delicate crowns of white, and the winter roses in the conservatory held their breath beneath thin veils of ice. It was a day for cloaks lined in fur, for hand-warmers perfumed with lavender, and for the carefully choreographed pageantry of aristocratic display. Lady Chiswick's winter garden party was among the final events of the season, exclusive, elegant, and ruthless in its precision. And today, it would become something else entirely. Ariel Hargrave stepped out of the carriage with her head held high, a veil of snow already catching in the folds of her deep blue wool gown. The collar was edged with grey fox fur, a gift from her mother, chosen not for luxury but for appearances. Ariel wore it like armor. On her arm, Lady Margaret walked with her usual swift purpose. Behind them trailed Isabella, silent and too pale beneath her rouge. Her emerald satin cloak looked heavy against the white of the garden path, and her expression betrayed an unease she could no longer mask with powdered laughter. The guests were gathered near the conservatory, where champagne flowed despite the cold, and music floated from an unseen quartet. Servants moved like shadows, balancing silver trays with poached pears, sugared violets, and honeyed walnuts. Conversation bubbled beneath plumes of visible breath. But every glance, every word, drifted toward Ariel. She felt it, the hush beneath the noise, the anticipation delicate as glass. Lucian had not yet arrived, but already his presence was assumed, and with it, a possibility that turned curious onlookers into watchful jurors. She knew why they stared, and she knew too that Lucian intended something today. His note had been brief, almost awkward in its formality. "I shall see you at Holland Park. There is a matter I would like to discuss." No signature, no sentiment, but the gravity had been unmistakable, and when he arrived just before the bells of St. Barnabas tolled 3, the air shifted. Lucian Blackwood, the Marquess of Ashbourne, stepped onto the garden path in a coat of charcoal wool, his gloved hands folded behind his back, his stride measured, his expression unreadable. He looked as though the wind and snow bowed to his will, and perhaps for a moment it did. He made his way toward Ariel, and the crowd parted instinctively, the way tides yield to the moon. When he reached her, he bowed. "Miss Hargrave," Ariel curtsied. "My lord." There was a pause, a breath, a shared silence where the world seemed suspended. And then Lucian turned to address Lady Margaret, his voice deep and firm. "Would you permit me a word with your daughter?" Lady Margaret's eyes glittered. "Of course." They walked slowly toward the glass house at the garden's edge. Their footsteps crunched softly against the gravel, their shadows long beneath the overcast sky. Inside, the warmth met them like a sigh. The panes of glass steamed slightly, framing them in a world apart. The air smelled of earth and lemons, and the faint golden light turned Ariel's cheeks the color of crushed rose petals. Lucian turned toward her. She saw the shape of something in his pocket. A box, small, dark, unmistakable. Her heart caught in her throat. But before he could speak, before anything could be said, the door of the conservatory swung open and a hush fell over the garden. Gasps, murmurs, the rustle of newspapers. Someone had passed them out like invitations. The Hargrave arrangement read the title in bold black letters. A column, a scandal. Silas Fairfax's latest attack, printed hours before, delivered at the height of a garden party. The words were poison. Ariel Hargrave, daughter of a fading family, manipulating the widowed Marquess into marriage with whispers of virtue and quiet grace. Her mother, Lady Margaret, negotiating debts behind closed doors. Isabella, the decoy. Ariel, the scheme. It was not an article, it was an execution. Through the glass, Ariel could see the papers in trembling hands. She saw her mother's face pale. She saw Isabella's lips part, not in outrage, but in guilt. And then she turned to Lucian. His hand hovered over the box in his pocket. She waited, but he did not reach for it. He looked at her, searching her face as if trying to decipher something beyond the words now etched in ink across London. And then he lowered his hand. Her breath stilled. He did not kneel. He did not speak. He only tucked the box back into the pocket of his coat. Ariel took a step back. Her eyes did not water. Her voice did not shake. "If you believe any part of that," she said quietly, "you should go." "I don't," he said, but his voice lacked the certainty she needed. "You're hesitating." "I'm protecting you." "No." She shook her head. "You're protecting yourself." He tried to reach for her then, but she turned. "Lucian," she whispered, and it was the first time she had used his name aloud in public. "I will not be rescued out of guilt. If you cannot choose me, fully, freely, without fear, then you must not choose me at all." The snow began to fall again, gently, melting on the glass panes above them. Lucian said nothing, and Ariel walked away. She crossed the garden, the falling snow soaking into the hem of her gown. She passed the silent guests, the gasping women, the whispering men. She passed her mother, who reached for her arm. She passed Isabella, whose eyes brimmed with something that looked like remorse, but Ariel could not stop to examine it. She did not stop until she was seated inside the carriage, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carved in frost. Back in the garden, Lord Henry Blackwood watched from beneath the arched entryway, untouched by snow, untouched by scandal. He folded the newspaper in his hands with quiet precision, slipped it beneath his coat, and allowed himself the faintest trace of a smile. Because doubt, once planted, did not need water to grow. It only needed silence. And Lucian, at the worst possible moment, had chosen exactly that. The winter that pressed against Mayfair's windows was not cruel in its bite, but in its stillness. It crept into drawing rooms and settled in teacups, in half-spoken sentences, in the silence between doorbells that should have rung, but did not. Snow no longer fell with innocence. It muffled secrets and tracked footprints through corridors where truths had no place to hide. In the drawing room of the Hargrave townhouse, a single coal burned low in the grate. The flames hissed softly, barely enough to warm the cold tension in the air. Ariel sat alone, her hands resting on her lap, a sheet of paper laid across her knees. It was a letter from the trustees of the Spitalfield sewing house, stiffly worded, yet not cruel. Due to recent controversy in the social pages and the resulting withdrawal of certain patrons, we regret to inform you that the financial support previously pledged to your educational initiative must be reconsidered. Below it, Other letters lay like fallen leaves. Notes from donors, anonymous and known, rescinding their support with language that stung worse for its civility. She looked down at her sketchbook, now returned but violated. Pages had been sliced, rearranged. Her neat handwriting had been twisted into false arithmetic, columns of numbers, sloppily inked to look like calculations. Imaginary estimates of Ashbourne's holdings, expenses, dowry projections. Her own name, circled in red ink beside the words, "securable through marriage." It was a forgery, but one that looked devastatingly plausible. She did not cry, not yet. But something in her, quiet and delicate, tore like a seam pulled too tightly. The door creaked open behind her. "Miss Ariel," came the hesitant voice of Thomas, the footman. His face was pale, and he twisted his cap in his hands. She turned slowly. "Yes? I wasn't supposed to say anything, but I think I did something wrong. I didn't know, I swear it." She stood. "What did you do?" His eyes darted toward the corridor, then lower, toward the floor. 2 days ago, a man came, said he was from Mr. Fairfax's office, said he'd been authorized to collect materials for an article you were working on. I thought it was strange, but he showed me a card with the Hargrave crest, said Lady Isabella approved it. Ariel's pulse slowed to a throb. "And you gave him my sketchbook?" He nodded. "He paid me to look the other way. I thought it was harmless." Nothing is harmless, she thought. Not in this city, not in this family. She dismissed him gently, then sat again, this time not in despair, but in resolve. She knew where she had to go. Hours later, as the bells of St. James's chimed 4, Lucian Blackwood strode into the narrow lobby of a Fleet Street print house, his boots damp with melting snow and his face set in steel. He did not wait for a secretary. He did not knock. He pushed through the oak door and found Silas Fairfax seated behind a desk littered with proofs and half-drunk brandy. The columnist looked up with a half-smile. "Ah, my lord, I was wondering when you might come to object." Lucian said nothing. He reached into his coat, retrieved a page from Ariel's sketchbook, and laid it flat on the desk. Fairfax raised an eyebrow. "You disapprove of her arithmetic?" Lucian's voice was like stone. This was altered badly, but just well enough for those who wished to believe it. Fairfax shrugged. "I only print what reaches me." "And who delivered it?" "An intermediary," he said. "A maid, works in the Hargrave household. Ellen, tidy, clever hands, quite a gift for mimicry." Lucian's jaw tensed. "And who paid you?" Fairfax reached for his drawer. From it, he withdrew a folded bank draft and placed it between them like a dropped gauntlet. The name was written in fine, measured script. H. Blackwood. Lucian stared at it, unblinking. His uncle's signature, precise and unmistakable. He left without a word. Back at Ashbourne House, the halls seemed darker than usual. He found Lord Henry in his study, sipping from a crystal glass as if waiting for him. Lucian stood before the hearth, the draft clenched in his hand. "Tell me it's a forgery," he said. Henry looked up, calm. "It is not. You paid Fairfax to destroy her." "No," he said, setting the glass down. "I paid him to reveal her, and it appears I succeeded." Lucian's voice dropped. "She did nothing wrong. She is dangerous. She is honest. She is poor," Henry snapped, "and idealistic. She threatens what this house has fought to preserve. You think marrying a woman of no fortune, no title, no political alliance is romantic? It is ruin, Lucian, ruin masked by lace and longing." Lucian's face twisted in quiet fury. "You used my late wife's paper, her ink, her memory." Henry did not flinch. "She would have agreed with me. She knew what it meant to be a marquess's wife." Lucian turned, his shoulders tight with rage. "She died miserable," and he left the room before the older man could speak again. That evening, Ariel awaited him, not in the drawing room, but in the parlour where the roses had long since withered. She wore a gown of grey silk, plain, without ornament. Her hair was unpinned, falling softly over her shoulders, and her hands were bare. When Lucian arrived, She saw it in his eyes. Pain, unspoken apologies, and doubt. She did not wait for him to speak. "The school is lost," she said. "The donors have withdrawn. The girls... I don't know how long Mrs. Penbury can hold on." Lucian stepped forward. "I can make it right." "No," she said gently. "You cannot. I can give you funds. I can restore the trust. You can kneel before me 100 times," she said, eyes shimmering. "But if you are doing it to erase guilt, or to undo your uncle's sins, or to silence society, then it will never be a proposal, only a transaction." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "I love you," she said, the words falling like snow between them. "But I will not become the bruise beneath your silk. If marrying me will cost you everything, then I will not let you pay the price." Lucian's voice was hoarse. "Ariel, please." But she shook her head. "For your title, for your tenants, for your name, I release you." She turned and walked toward the door, and for the first time in years, Lucian Blackwood did not follow. As she stepped into the night, the air sliced her lungs like glass. Her heart did not shatter. It folded carefully, quietly, like a letter tucked away in a drawer. And in a house of shadows and inheritance, Lucian stood alone, surrounded by everything he had been raised to protect, and none of what he truly needed. The air in Spitalfield smelled of coal, damp wool, and old onions, a scent both familiar and relentless, etched into the bricks of every alley and beneath the fingernails of every working girl who passed through the narrow courts of the East End. The January wind scraped the city bare, but within the cracked plaster walls of the sewing house, a fire flickered in the stove, defying the cold with defiant, meager warmth. Ariel Hargrave stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass. Her gown was simple, her hair tightly braided and tucked beneath her bonnet. She looked not like a lady of Mayfair, but like one of the many women who stitch through daylight with cracked fingers and hope sewn invisibly between seams. She was no longer the girl who had arrived timidly weeks before. She had lost her donors, lost her place in society's esteem, lost the man she had let herself imagine beside her. But she had not lost herself. Behind her, at a long wooden table worn smooth by years of work, sat Ruth Penbury, the eldest seamstress at the house, her hands busy threading a needle while her eyes, shrewd and brown, glanced up with curiosity. "I've never seen a lady like you, so quiet and so loud at the same time," Ruth said. "You walk in like you belong and speak like you've been listening for years." Ariel turned, the corner of her mouth curling faintly. "Perhaps I have." Ruth set her work down and crossed her arms. "You said you needed help. Something about a report? Records?" "Yes," Ariel replied. "There's a place, an archive near Southwark, where inquests are stored. I've reason to believe something important was hidden, something about the Marchioness's death." "You believe she was murdered?" "No," Ariel said. "I believe she was silenced, and someone kept her words buried." The older woman studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Then let's dig." That afternoon, bundled in cloaks and scarves, Ariel and Ruth boarded an omnibus and rode silently through the heart of London, past chimneys coughing smoke into the grey sky, past narrow lanes where children played barefoot, past drawing rooms where names like Ashbourne and Hargrave still meant something. The Southwark Archive was a forgotten place, a domed building that smelled of mildew and dust. The clerk, a man with spectacles permanently sliding down his nose, took some convincing before handing them the coroner's inquest ledgers from 3 years prior. Ruth helped Ariel flip through the brittle pages, fingers careful, reverent. And there, beneath columns of tidy handwriting, they found it: Lucinda Blackwood, age 28, deceased, cause of death, accidental fall. But just beneath the final signature, scrawled faintly in a different hand, was a supplemental note, half torn, never indexed. Subject had voiced concerns regarding financial isolation. Previous correspondences mention intention to consult solicitor regarding separation. Documented expressions of emotional distress. Access to funds restricted by next of kin. Ariel stared at the page as if it were a mirror. She wanted to leave, she whispered. She wanted control over her own life. And Lord Henry made sure no one ever knew. They copied the report carefully, wrapping the page in oilcloth. Ruth slipped it into a satchel. "Now what?" she asked. "Now we speak louder." By the time night fell, Ariel stood in the shadows near a riverside warehouse, her cloak pulled tight and her bonnet secured with trembling hands. She was not alone. Beside her stood Thomas Reed, a young reporter from the Gazette, whose sharp mind and quiet sense of justice had made him both admired and feared in Fleet Street. He had met Ariel 2 weeks prior at a lecture on education for the poor. She had spoken little, but her questions had lingered with him. "I've got the ledgers," he said now, pulling a small leather notebook from his coat. "A clerk at Fairfax's office owed me a favor, or feared I'd write him into infamy." Ariel took the notebook carefully. Inside were the names of benefactors, bribes and payments, all routed through an account belonging to Elias Finlay, man of business for Lord Henry Blackwood. Page after page exposed a web of manipulation. Silence bought, narratives shaped, scandals inflated, reputations crushed. "He paid Fairfax," Thomas said, repeatedly. "Every piece on you, on your family, on the school, traced back to the same source." Ariel felt her heart thud. "Can it be proven?" Thomas nodded. "It's enough for any man to fall, even one with a title." But Ariel didn't smile. Her hands trembled around the notebook, not with fear, but with purpose. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring truth. She sent the packet the next morning. Addressed to Ashbourne House, sealed in wax, it contained 3 things: a copy of the coroner's suppressed note, the financial ledger, and a list of donors, names of those who had agreed to return their support if the lies were undone. She sent it without fanfare, without a letter, without hope, but not without dignity. That afternoon, as snow began to fall again over the Thames, Ariel walked alone along the embankment, her cloak fluttering behind her like the remnants of a storm now past. She stood by the water, near the place where barges moored and smoke drifted from chimney pipes, and closed her eyes. The river hissed softly below. Wind tugged at the corners of her scarf. She whispered, not to the wind, not to Lucian, not even to herself, but to the part of her that had once believed silence was noble. "No more," she said. "Dignity is not silence. It is choosing when to speak." And then she turned, slowly, and walked into the snow. Far across the city, Isabella Hargrave sat in her chamber, her face blotched with tears, her gloves clutched tightly in her lap. Lady Margaret had left after yet another lecture. The maid, Ellen, stood nervously near the fireplace. "I never meant for this to go so far," Isabella said, her voice hoarse. "I only told Fairfax small things, snippets. I didn't know about the rest. I didn't know Uncle Henry." Her voice broke. "She was always the quiet one, the invisible one. But somehow she became more than I ever was." Ellen handed her a handkerchief, unsure what comfort to offer. "I thought if I could keep her in the shadows, maybe I'd still shine," Isabella whispered. "But I see now, the light was never mine to begin with." And for the first time in her life, Isabella wept without vanity. The ballroom of Lancaster House glittered like a chandelier, shaken loose into 100 flames. Gaslight kissed the gilded cornices and trembled upon the polished marble floor, where gentlemen's boots and ladies' slippers whispered of power and performance. The charity gala, hosted beneath banners of noble causes and polished hypocrisy, was London's event of the season, a stage upon which the most dangerous performances were not sung, but whispered. At precisely 8:30, the doors parted. Ariel Hargrave stepped through, draped not in the expected silks of emerald or rose, but in dove-grey satin. The fabric, fluid and almost mournful in tone, clung to her figure with modest elegance. Her neckline curved in a softened square, trimmed with whisper-fine lace, and her sleeves were unadorned save for a single stitch of embroidery shaped like a thistle, delicate, overlooked, but impossible to crush. She wore no jewels, no pearls, no rubies, no tokens of wealth to dazzle the senses or buy forgiveness. And still the room stilled. Not since the ball in Mayfair had the ton paused mid-waltz and mid-lie to turn its collective gaze upon the woman once dismissed as the ugly sister. But tonight there was no pity in the air, only the crackling tension of uncertainty. She walked with the posture of someone who had learned the price of silence and the higher cost of truth. Heads tilted, fans slowed. The orchestral overture faltered. Lucian Blackwood, the Marquess of Ashbourne, rose from the edge of the gallery, every inch of his black-tailored figure taut as a drawn bow. He did not yet move, but his eyes followed her as if tethered. By the far wall, Thomas Reed adjusted the cuffs of his modest coat, nodding once to the discreet porter who carried the folio. It was time. Ariel did not approach the dance floor. Instead, she crossed to the dais set for the evening's honored patrons, men and women who donated in guineas and devoured gossip in pounds. She turned slowly, her gaze meeting those who had once whispered about her gloves, her complexion, her smile. "I beg your indulgence," she said calmly, voice ringing with a grace that shamed the chandeliers. "I come tonight not for celebration, but for clarity." Murmurs stirred. She lifted a ledger, bound in worn leather. "This book does not glitter. It does not flatter. It records, line by line, payments made to silence good men and destroy honest work. Mr. Silas Fairfax accepted funds to defame not only my name, but the very seamstresses you claim to champion." Gasps fluttered. Someone dropped a glass. Reed stepped forward and handed her the coroner's report, the edges still brittle from age. Ariel's hands did not shake. "And this," she continued, "was buried beneath legal filings and locked archives. The late Marchioness of Ashbourne did not die in despair, but she did die under control. Control enforced by the same man who paid Fairfax, Lord Henry Blackwood. At the back of the hall, Fairfax's face drained of blood, as if a phantom hand had wrung his throat. "This is slander," he hissed, lurching forward. But Lucian descended the marble staircase, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "You will not speak." Guards, already briefed, closed in. Fairfax's protests drowned beneath the rising tide of scandalized delight. Lady Wrexham fanned herself so violently her feathers collapsed. Fairfax was dragged from the room, his ink-stained fingers trembling, his cravat undone, his name already blackened in the streets that had once paid him in gold. Ariel stood still. Then Lucian approached her. Not swiftly, not gallantly, but steadily, like a man walking toward consequence. The silence was cathedral deep. When he reached her side, he did not speak first. He bowed his head. "I did not trust you," he said, "and in doing so, I betrayed what you are, what you always were." He dropped to one knee. Gasps again, this time not sharp with scandal, but breathless with the recognition of something rare. A man repenting not for duty, but for love. "I do not kneel to rescue you," he said, his voice thick. "I kneel because I failed you. And I ask not your forgiveness tonight, but the chance to earn it with every choice that follows." Tears welled in Ariel's eyes, but none fell. From the shadows, Lord Henry emerged. His face was composed, lips thin with fury wrapped in civility. "Do you think declarations absolve debts?" he asked coldly. "The Hargraves are drowning in liabilities. Your lady stands on a foundation of rotting wood. Marry her, and you bury Ashbourne." He snapped his fingers. A footman delivered a slim folder, evidence of every unpaid loan, every note called in secrecy. Ariel took the folder. She did not flinch. "I am not blind to numbers," she said. "I have spent months studying them. Not just debts, but possibilities." She opened her satchel and withdrew another book, her own. Inside, notes sketched in careful ink, revised leases, urban property restructuring, educational endowments tied to sustainable rents. A plan not just to survive, but to lead. I offer my inheritance, not to mend a ledger, but to invest in the women I've worked beside, in the children of tenants, in the soul of an estate that should not feed itself by starving others. Henry laughed, sharp, bitter. You think the trustees will listen to a seamstress's daughter? Lucian stood. They will listen to their Marquess, he said, because I say her vision is the future I want to fund. And I will cover every Hargrave debt if I must sell the Ashbourne tapestries one thread at a time. A hush fell so deep it pressed against skin. One by one, the trustees of Ashbourne stood. An hour later, inside the repurposed study of Lord Henry Blackwood, the vote was cast. The man who had ruled the estate with an iron ledger was removed from financial control, pending full inquiry. Outside, snow began to fall, quiet and unsentimental. But within the great ballroom, lit now not only by gaslight but by revelation, Lucian and Ariel stood side by side, not victorious because of wealth or lineage, but because they had chosen truth over preservation, vision over fear. The reckoning had come, not with fire, but with ink, silk, and a voice that refused to tremble. And this time, the silence that followed was not of scandal, but of awe. Morning broke over Hanover Square with the soft hush of reverence. The sky, pale as parchment, bore no clouds, only the faintest blush of rose at the edges, as though even the heavens had paused in quiet acknowledgement of what the day meant. At St. George's, the church doors stood open to the chill of late winter, flanked by ivy-strewn columns and guarded by the solemn toll of a single bell. London society gathered not in spectacle, but in suspense, hushed beneath the arching nave where history and future prepared to collide. The organ did not yet play. The aisles had not yet filled, and yet there was a strange serenity hanging in the air, a breath held, a heart waiting. Inside Ashbourne House, the music room stood open for the first time in nearly 6 years. The room had once been locked, sealed by grief and memory. The Marchioness's favourite sonata had hung there like a ghost, refusing to be played. But today, light filtered through the tall windows, painting soft amber lines across the floorboards, and along the walls, once bare and silent, hung Ariel's sketches. They were not grand portraits or romantic tapestries. They were plans, hope made visible. A dormitory window that opened to morning light. A classroom with a seamstress's table, half-threaded needles resting like commas between lessons. A reading room where little girls might learn letters without the ache of frostbitten fingers. The charity school she had dreamed of, brick by imagined brick, smiled down like blessings. Lucian stood alone in the doorway, hand braced against the frame. He could not remember the last time the house had breathed like this. Upstairs, in the quiet of her chamber, Ariel Hargrave prepared to walk into a world that had once refused to see her. She wore no tiara, no diamonds. Her gown was of palest celadon silk, cut simply but with elegance in every stitch. The fabric moved like river water around her frame, whispering strength in modesty. Her sleeves were long, her waist lightly cinched, and the train fell like a sigh to the carpeted floor. Isabella stood behind her, silent, holding a length of lace between gloved hands. Her expression was fragile, touched by remorse, but it was the absence of cruelty that struck hardest. "You never needed forgiving," Isabella whispered, smoothing the lace veil over Ariel's dark hair. "Only seeing." Ariel met her gaze in the mirror. There was no triumph there, only peace. "I'm glad you finally did," she replied gently. The church filled slowly, respectfully. Lady Margaret arrived with a handkerchief already in hand, though no tears yet fell. When the Hargrave carriage stopped before the steps, every whisper hushed, and Ariel stepped out, no longer hidden in the shadow of a sister's charm or a father's failure, no longer hunched by scandal or shame. She walked toward the chapel as herself, unapologetic, serene, a woman carved from quiet rebellion and stubborn dignity. Inside, Lucian turned. His breath caught not because she dazzled, but because she calmed something inside him that had never known stillness. When she reached him, he did not smile. He simply looked as though seeing her clearly was miracle enough. The vicar's voice rose in solemn cadence, Old English laced with Latin, but it was Lucian's voice that broke the silence. I vow to walk beside you, not ahead of you, to shelter but not smother, to hear you when you speak, and to listen when you do not. I vow partnership, not possession, and should silence ever return, I vow to wait until your courage finds its breath again. Ariel's eyes glistened. She said her vows softly, but they echoed through the cathedral with the clarity of bells. I vow to believe in what we build, even when storms come, to name truth when it's painful, to see the man behind the title, to love not the shape of your estate, but the shape of your soul. Gaslight flickered above. Somewhere near the back, Reed quietly took notes, not for publication, but for memory. The rings were exchanged without flourish. When they kissed, it was brief. No clamor, no dramatic crescendo of music, only the sound of cloth rustling, breath-catching, and a quiet world folding inward. Later that afternoon, in the rose-walled drawing room of Ashbourne, Lady Margaret took Ariel's hand and led her to a small alcove, away from the guests. I once married for duty, she confessed, voice low. It gave me position, safety, and nothing of joy. I learned to be elegant, not honest, and I envied those who dared otherwise. She paused. Today, I envy you. Ariel, overcome, could not answer. She merely pressed her hand over Lady Margaret's and held it there, 2 generations of women linked by the bravery of what they had survived and what they had dared to desire. Evening cast soft shadows upon the manor as laughter echoed from the reopened halls. The kitchens brimmed with warmth, the servants in high spirits, and no room bore the dust of neglect. The Ashbourne crest had not changed, but the soul of the house had been rewoven by quiet revolutions. In Spitalfields, the little workroom received a notice tacked to the door. Full funding restored, new donors confirmed, applications open for the spring class. Girls would learn with light in their eyes and warmth on their fingers. In the offices of Fleet Street, the presses that once roared against Ariel's name now printed Reed's exposé in careful lines. Fairfax's deeds lay stripped and cold on the page, his legacy a cautionary tale inked in greed and arrogance. Justice had not arrived in Thunder, but it had come, and in the final hour of that golden day, Ariel paused at the end of a long hallway. Sunlight poured in through the windows, catching her figure in glow. She stood before the great mirror once owned by the late Marchioness, where once she might have seen awkwardness, hesitancy, the echo of cruel nicknames. Now she saw a woman, tall, calm, and centered, not the ugly sister, a woman fully seen. Lucian's reflection appeared behind her, one hand extending, palm up, eyes soft, with something too deep for words. She took it without question. Outside, the carriage waited. As the wheels turned and the bells of St. George's faded into twilight, their joined hands rested on the velvet seat, no longer seeking, no longer hiding, just together. And in the distance, the promise of a future rang as surely as any vow spoken that day. They were not perfect, but they had chosen each other. And they were seen. The air in Ashbourne carried the scent of blooming wisteria, the vines draping like garlands over limestone walls that had stood for centuries but never known such laughter. Children's footsteps echoed through the courtyard, not in mischief but in wonder, bare feet tapping stone like music, giggles lifting toward the windows like prayers answered late but true. The Ashbourne of old had been somber, elegant, untouchable, but now it breathed with life. In the West Wing, once sealed and shadowed, the Spitalfields girls now slept beneath embroidered quilts, each square stitched by a hand that once trembled with cold. They rose with the sun, not to toil, but to learn, reading, writing, sewing, sketching. A bell rang for lessons, another for lunch, and one at dusk, simply to remind them they were safe. Ariel walked the corridor with a quiet smile, her eyes lingering on the crooked stitchwork of a child sampler framed beside the door. "Be brave and soft and true," it read. She was 6 years older now. Her hair was longer, a shade darker, and her hands bore faint ink stains more often than gloves. But her eyes, those keen, unwavering eyes, had not dulled. They had learned how to hold joy. In her arms, she carried a baby, not yet a year old, dark-haired, restless, with cheeks as full as autumn apples, and a laugh that arrived like a secret escaping. Isabella followed behind, balancing 2 little boys, twins with their father's mischief and her startling green eyes. Her wedding ring glinted beneath her gloves. Her smile was real now, not rehearsed. She had married, quietly, to a man who loved her not for how she sparkled, but for how she shone when no one was watching. She had paid her penance not in shame, but in change. Downstairs, Lady Margaret was reading a storybook aloud by the parlour hearth, a pair of girls leaning sleepily against her sides. Once she had ruled with precision, a duchess in everything but name. Now she ruled tea hours and bedtime tales. Her eyes, long guarded, had softened. She no longer envied. She simply loved. In the garden, Lucian stood beside a young boy of 5, his posture already too proud for his age, but his fingers still sticky with honey. They were building something. A kite, perhaps, or a trap for birds neither would catch. Lucian's hair had silvered at the temples, but his hands remained steady, his voice low and kind. "Hold the string tighter," he instructed. "The wind isn't always gentle." The boy looked up and nodded. "But it always comes back." Lucian smiled faintly. "Yes, it always does." Later that evening, the house gathered, as they often did. Reed had arrived from the city, older now but never slower, with a new edition tucked beneath his arm and spectacles perched precariously on his nose. He spoke of reforms, of education bills passed in Parliament, of society finally listening to the voices it had long silenced. "And Fairfax?" Ariel asked quietly. "Died in obscurity. A boarding house in Bristol. No visitors. No legacy." A pause. "Some prices," Reed added, "are paid slowly." Ariel nodded. She felt no triumph, only closure. Lord Henry had vanished from public view after the trustees removed him. He now lived alone in a distant estate, far from the titles he once controlled. No letters had come, no apologies. His silence was not peace, but absence. Outside, the sun began to dip, throwing long shadows across the lawn. Lucien found Ariel on the east balcony, their infant daughter asleep against her shoulder. He touched her hand gently. "Do you ever wonder," he murmured, "how close we came to missing all of this?" Ariel turned to him, eyes brimming with quiet wonder. "Not anymore," she said. "I only wonder how I ever lived before knowing what it meant to be chosen." They stood together, not as legend, not as scandal, not as redemption, but as husband and wife, lovers and parents, partners still learning the shape of one another's courage. Below, the children's laughter rang out again. And in the mirror behind them, where once she had sought permission to be seen, Ariel caught her reflection again, not with awe, not with disbelief, but with calm recognition. She was no longer the ugly sister. She was the woman who had once refused to bow. And now, 6 springs later, she had built a life where no one else would have dared to dream one. The wheels of a carriage turned far off in the distance. Not leaving this time, but arriving, bringing letters, students, guests, maybe even futures not yet imagined. And Ariel Hargrave Blackwood turned toward it, her husband's hand in hers, their daughter warm on her chest, and knew the world would try again and again to forget women like her, but now there was a school that would remember, and a love that would never unsee her. Not ever again. Every love story leaves behind more than a memory. It leaves a lesson. Ariel's journey taught us that dignity is not measured by appearances, nor by status, but by the strength it takes to rise in silence, and the courage it takes to speak when it matters most. She wasn't chosen because she sparkled. She shone because she never stopped believing that she was worthy of more. And Lucian, a man hardened by grief and expectation, finally learned that true nobility is found not in bloodlines or titles, but in choosing love without condition, even when the world expects calculation. This was never just a story about a misunderstood woman and a guarded duke. It was about healing, about daring to be seen, about the kind of love that doesn't rescue, but walks beside you, quietly, faithfully, for a lifetime. If this story moved you, if you felt the ache in Ariel's silence, the fire in her defiance, or the tenderness in Lucian's final vow, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you made it all the way to the end, write the word "seen" in the comments. That one word means everything in Ariel's journey, and it tells us you were truly with us every step of the way. If you'd like to support the team who pours heart and soul into bringing these period romances to life, you can send a super thanks in any amount you wish. Your generosity helps keep these stories alive and reaching new hearts. And if you can't support us that way, no worries. Sharing this video with a friend, a sister, or someone who still believes in slow-burning, soul-deep love is another beautiful way to help. Don't forget to explore the other stories we've linked here in the video cards. More unforgettable heroines, more aching glances, more hearts that dare to love. Thank you for watching, for feeling, for remembering that every woman deserves to be seen.